in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Following last week's devastating wildfires, the PEO trade union is calling on the authorities to investigate the conditions under which agricultural workers are employed.
Every employer has a responsibility to take all necessary measures to safeguard that the worker is working under conditions that they don't put the worker on a dangerous situation.
Many small businesses don't have the wherewithal or the knowledge to implement safety rules.
Usually those micro businesses are not members of web or any other organization. They do not have all the access to the information or the training.
And despite a spike in new COVID cases, hoteliers are remaining optimistic about this summer season.
We hope that they will be able to recover by the end of July, beginning of August.
We couldn't do this week's programme without referring to the dreadful fires that occurred at the end of last week and took 4 lives of Egyptian seasonal workers. One of the issues that's been raised following the disaster is the protection or otherwise that we have for workers here in Cyprus. So it's a pleasure to welcome to our programme the former Minister of Labour and now Deputy Secretary-General of the PEO Trade Union, because they're the ones who have been raising these questions and asking for answers. Sotiroula Haralambous, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can you first of all outline for us what the current legislation is as regards workers and in particular third country nationals who come to work in Cyprus? We rely on them very greatly, particularly in the agricultural sector, and my understanding is that they are entitled, as long as of course they're legally employed, to the same protection as Cypriot workers.
Yes, this is the case, as you have said. I mean, workers, irrespective of their gender or their religious or their origin, they have the same rights when working in Cyprus. According to our legislation for health and safety, every employer has a responsibility to take all necessary measures to safeguard that the worker is working under conditions that they don't put a worker on a dangerous situation. And this legislation implies for all of us. I mean, whether we are Cypriots or whether we are foreigners, there is no distinction according to your religion or your origin and whatsoever. Now, the second thing is that according to the procedures that they have followed when an employer gets a permission to employ a third country citizen, they have to implement a contract of employment, saying which are the terms of employment. And one of the major terms of employment is that the employer is responsible to give accommodation, to give food, and not just to give, but in condition that is good for a person's dignity. Okay, so these are the questions that we are raising with the letter that the General Secretary of the Cypriot Federation of Labour has sent to the Minister of Labour. The one thing is, what were the situation and the conditions under which these persons were living? Because they were living very near to the place that they were working, how the conditions were. And of course, there is another more general issue that we have raised it as PEO many times. There is a lack of control.
I was going to come to that, Sotiroula, because this is all the responsibility, is it not, of the Labour Inspection Department. And I've seen photos, I have not yet verified them, but I've seen photos of a shack that purportedly was where these four poor people lived. Now, we know that there are a lot of foreign workers, particularly seasonal workers at certain times of year. Is it physically possible for the Labour Inspection Department to go round all the farms in Cyprus and check that the correct conditions are being met?
I can answer you very, straight, but it is not. They don't have the necessary staff. And we are always, as a federation, saying that there is a need for them to take more persons in order to do their job. But also, one of the things that we have suggested many years now is that we can help this situation in groups of people. For example, the trade unions, the employers' organization, and the Ministry of Labour together to create common investigation teams that they will go and investigate and control and examine what is the situation of living of these people. And this is something that it is done in other countries in order to help the controls in an area that is very difficult to be controlled.
Yes, of course it is. We understand, I think, a lot of the difficulties. But, for example, if I wish to employ 5 or 6 seasonal workers to pick my strawberries, tomatoes, or whatever it is, then presumably, if I am doing this legally, I am drawing up a contract. Who is it who oversees that contract? Am I obliged to put a copy of that contract in with the Labour Department so they would then know that on my farm I'm going to employ people and they could come straight to my farm and inspect the conditions under which my employees will be working?
This is the situation. First of all, the contracts of employment, they have to be stamped by the Labour Department of the Ministry of Labour. And, of course, there is another thing, and this is a thing that unfortunately it was agreed but it is not implemented, that according to the procedure for giving permission for employment of foreign employers, the Labour Department, before giving this permission, they have to convey a tripartite committee to examine whether the employer implements the legislation, the contracts, and so on. But unfortunately, this tripartite committee, they don't operate. Secondly, when they give the permission, it's also their duty, if the contract is not implemented, to take measures. And one of the measures that they can take is to stop the contract and try to find another job to the foreign workers. They have tools in their hand. The question is how they use these tools, and that's why I've started saying that we as PEO, we have asked from the Ministry of Labour that the whole procedure of giving permissions to the third country citizens to come to Cyprus to work, and the criteria, the control mechanism, these are things that they have to be discussed in a tripartite dialogue in order to make the necessary changes so to protect these people. And by protecting these people, we also protect all workers. It's not something that it has to do only with foreigners. It has to do with workers as a whole.
Can I ask you what the obligations are on behalf of the employer in terms of things like insurance and social security payments and so on?
For social security payments, they have the same obligations as for Cyprus. They have to be registered to the social insurance system. The employer has to pay the contribution from his side, and the employee also the contribution to the social insurance system as an employee. And also the employer has the obligation to have an insurance, a private insurance, when it comes to accidents that happen at work. This is a general legislation that we have in Cyprus, that each employer, they have to be insured against injuries, against accidents.
And are these measures carried out? I mean, if every employer had all this paperwork checked...
This is a question that has to be raised to the ministry, but speaking from our experience as trade unions, we know that not always these legislations and these conditions are implemented.
Now let's talk, if we may, about the particular case of the fire, because one cannot blame the employer or indeed anyone else for what happened last weekend. But it did occur to me, Sotiroula, that since we do have such a large number of foreign seasonal workers who are not familiar with Cyprus, perhaps, or the areas that they end up in, would it not be a good idea to make sure that there was some sort of protocol obliging employers to, if you like, orientate their workers and explain to them that you're in this village, the nearest town is there, if it's an emergency, do this, and so on and so forth? Would that not have possibly saved lives?
I cannot answer, for issues that we don't have the full information. But what I can answer, and these are issues that we are always raising, is that there is a need for each foreigner that comes to work in Cyprus to be given information in a language that they understand, information about their terms of employment, about the situation of employment, condition of employment, condition of living, what are the duties, what are the responsibilities, what are the rights, what is Cyprus, what is the environment in which they are living. And we are now having this discussion because of this incident. I will remind you that before some months we have other situations, other incidents. For example, it was the incident with the illegal workers working in the slaughtery in Nicosia, and where people, they didn't have the necessary information about coronavirus in a language that it was understandable to them. So yes, there is this issue, and this is another thing that the Labour Department, together, with the Ministry of Interior, maybe they have to sit down and, together with the employers' organizations and the trade unions organizations, to write down what are the information that it is needed to be given to these people coming in Cyprus to work. It's a very great thing to have people that they left their family in order to find a better job, in order to get money to send to their families and to lose their lives in this tragic way.
Yes, it was tragic. But the other thing, of course, is that the last person who is likely to report, let's say, unsanitary living conditions or overlong working hours and so on, is the actual employee, because if he dares to do that as a whistleblower, he's likely to get the sack.
That's why we say that, because the employee feels that he's weak. He feels that if he does something, he will be punished, especially people who don't know the situation, they don't know the environment, they're not, they feel a very great fear. That's why we say that they cannot leave this thing on the hands of the employee. It's on the hands of the responsible authorities that this duty has to go, to make the necessary inspections, to give the necessary information, to support and to strengthen these people in order, when there is a violation of the term of employment, to know where to go to make the necessary appeal.
And of course they can't go because they're on the farm.
They can always come to us, but we recognize and we know that it is not easy for them.
What about an anonymous phone number that they would all be given to report?
This agency, of the Inspectorate Agency, there is, this was established at the time I was the minister, there is a free line. I don't remember now the number, but there is a free telephone line in which everyone, irrespective of origin, can get the phone and can call and tell what is the situation.
Well, that at least would be an assistance for the Labour Ministry.
This telephone line exists and it operates.
We'll find the number and put it out there. Soterula Haralambos, many years since we've spoken, but thank you very much indeed for sparing time this week. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, following on from that, we're going to talk next to the Cyprus Employers and Industrialists Federation about their understanding of the laws governing workers in Cyprus. Bolivios Boliviou is their Industrial Relations and Social Policy Officer, and he joins us now. Bolivios, can you tell us first of all about the take of OEV on the events of last weekend and the fire, because it's always distressing, but 4 deaths, and I wonder, do we have the correct legislation in place to make sure workers in Cyprus are safe?
Well, with regards to the occupational, let's say, health and safety legislation, I would say that the legislative framework governing the occupational health and safety is comprehensive, and it is in line with the European acquis. The health and safety laws and regulations are amended from time to time to incorporate new European directives or regulations. The legislation now on health and safety at work states that every employer must ensure the safety, health and well-being at work of all its employees. And it also describes certain legal obligations of the employer, like, for instance, to conduct a risk assessment and take all necessary preventive measures to avoid any work-related accidents, to control the dangers at their source, to replace, let's say, dangerous substances like chemicals with less dangerous ones, to provide employees with adequate training, and to provide the employees with the necessary protective equipment, like, for instance, helmet, gloves, boots, etc. Now, with regards to the unfortunate incident, the legislation on health and safety also states that the employer is relieved of liability for events due to abnormal or unforeseen circumstances beyond his control, and or to extraordinary events, the consequences of which could not have been avoided despite all due diligence. And it means here like earthquakes or fires, etc. So with regards to the unfortunate events, I would say that to our mind, the fires that took place in Cyprus are within this category where the employer is relieved of the liability, exactly because it's not like a work-related accident which happens, let's say, at the employer's premises, but it was a fire that it was beyond the control of the employer.
A sort of force majeure, I suppose. So legally
exactly.
speaking, definitely the employer is not responsible. But let me ask you about OEV's policy when it comes to its members. Now, I don't know how many members of yours are actually in the agricultural sector. I suspect that more of them are in other businesses and industrial sectors. But you do, I think, have some farmers among your members. And the difference, I suppose, for people working out in the open air and so on, do you give any advice to your members on the issues at hand?
Right. Well, the members of the Cyprus Employees and Industrialists Federation are from literally all sectors of economic activity. Now, we do provide them with specialized training programs on health and safety at work, and the employers and their staff members attend those training programs. So it is very important, and it is an employer's obligation to actually train the staff of the enterprise. A few days ago, we also circulated a memo highlighting the fact that due to the high temperature in Cyprus the past few days, the employers should take also necessary measures according to the heat stress code that was recently amended as well. And we inform the employers on their legal obligations, and we provide them with the guidance on what measures they should adopt and implement in order to prevent any, let's say, work-related accidents.
Now, when it comes to actually following up with your members, do you do any inspections to make sure that, for example, the health and safety regulations of your members are being adhered to, or do you rely on them and their sense of fair play or honesty or whatever to say, yes, we've done it, and they have done it?
No, we don't do any inspections. For the inspections, we have the government authority, the Labour Inspectorate, that is responsible to carry out the inspections. We provide them with the training programs. We also provide them with various consultative services, but it is the employer's, let's say, obligation to maintain and to carry out, all the measures and all the measures that he or she should adopt to their business. So we don't do the inspections, we just provide the training and the consultative services.
And as far as you know, do the majority of employers abide by this legislation? Do we have any figures anywhere of inspections that have been carried out where it's been revealed that the measures are not being followed?
Well, I would say that the past few years, the employers are following, let's say, even stricter measures than the ones that are provided by the law, because the law sets, let's say, the minimum standards, and then it's up to the enterprise or the company to come up with its own internal, let's say, regulations. And I would say that there is a high, let's say, percentage of employers having in place and following, all the various laws and regulations. There are general laws that apply to all businesses, and then you have specific regulations that are for each sector of economic activity, whether it is the construction sector or the hotelier sector, or let's say businesses that are working with various dangerous chemicals or other substances. And I would say that the employers to follow the laws and regulations, and there is, let's say, a high level of conforming with these legislations, and we see that the past few years the employers are more, let's say, in a high percentage of compliance with what the laws and regulations say. Although it is a bit more difficult for the micro businesses to comply with those legislations, usually those micro businesses are not members of web or any other organization. They do not have all the access to the information or the training. They are consisted of very few persons. Usually it's family-owned business. And I would assume that the micro businesses may not be able to, first of all, getting the information, then train, and then follow all the laws and regulations as they should.
And that presumably is up to the Ministry of Labour and the Labour Inspectorate to make sure that that information is indeed out there as far as these micro businesses are concerned.
Yeah, it's a challenge for everybody, for all the society and for the Labour Inspectorate. How do you reach out? How do you contact these micro-level businesses, especially the ones that are situated in rural areas? How do you reach out? How do you inform them? How do you help them out to get all the necessary information and train them and make sure that they follow those legislations?
Well, that certainly seems to be a little bit of a gap that has been revealed with the events of last week. Bolivios Boliviou, Industrial Relations and Social Policy Officer at the Cyprus Employers and Industrialists Federation, or EV, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Just as the Cyprus hotel industry was hoping for some of the summer to be workable this year, a spike in new coronavirus cases prompted the government to introduce new restrictions. Haris Loizidis is the chairman of the Cyprus Hotel Association, and he joins us now. Haris, it was looking good, and suddenly it's not looking so good once again. Are you going to lose another summer?
Actually, the whole pandemic has been a major blow to the hotel and tourism industry, not just in Cyprus, but I would say worldwide. The situation is not very good. I guess that July has been lost, and now our only hope is for things to start gradually to improve as a result of the recent measures by the government, where big crowds are not allowed anymore. And we hope that we'll be able to recover by the end of July, beginning of August.
Right, now let's talk a bit about vaccinations, because my understanding is that a fair proportion of people who work in the hotel industry, particularly the younger people, have not been vaccinated. And I think I also read that hoteliers are now in a position, should they so desire, to only permit people who have been vaccinated to enter their premises.
Well, we are following strictly the government regulations and the various announcements which call for only people with a safe pass can enter a hotel. Safe pass means vaccination or a recent 72 hours maximum negative test, or if somebody has already been through the COVID case and it's in the stage of recovery. So these are the three options that one has in order to enter a hotel. At the same time, we require the same for our staff. We urge them to go and vaccinate, and those who refuse to do it, they have to deliver a negative rapid or PCR test every other day. So this is putting a lot of pressure for people to go and vaccinate. In the last few days, because of this announcement by the Cyprus Hotel Association as well as the new government instructions, I think that we see a huge sort of change in the spirit of the hotel staff, and they are all applying now for vaccinations. We have even secured the mobile unit by the Ministry of Health to come around the hotels and offer vaccination on the spot.
Well, we'll assume that that is going to happen then, and on our side, things are looking up. However, if we look at our major markets for tourists, particularly the United Kingdom, that is still very much hanging in the balance, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but it has just been announced that countries in the amber list, like Cyprus, are now in a different status. So that means, in other words, that UK tourists who want to visit countries of amber status, if they are vaccinated fully, then they can return to the UK without any need for quarantine. So this is a very good step, and I hope that it will gradually open up the UK market. At the same time, from Russia, we have a significant increase in the number of flights day by day. At the moment, we are somewhere around 70 or 80 flights on a weekly basis from Russia. So things are kind of looking better, but of course a lot of time has been lost.
And of course, if the cases continue to rise, I think on Wednesday it was 956 new cases. If it goes above 1,000, we'll go back into the red category, won't we?
Well, this is one concern, but we feel that since the measures have been announced, we will gradually see a reduction. We might see a continuation of this trend of increased number of cases for a few more days, but then after that, we'll start to see the reduction. We've seen it over and over again the last 1.5 years, so I think that it's going to come around again.
We hope so. Haris Loizidis, chairman of the Cyprus Hotel Association, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you very much.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.